Story 1. Kabul, Afghanistan. In the back of an up-armored Toyota Hilux with two unarmed contractors and me armed with a 9mm handgun that I had only fired once. I was an information technology specialist in the United States Air Force, so definitely not a lot of range time. Story 2. Norfolk, Virginia. My teammate was robbed of his bike and cash on the first night. Then I was robbed of my bike on the second night. We had driven there from Canada for a bicycle motocross competition. Story 3. I am 75 years old. As I watch my stamina, my balance, and my mental acuity slip away, this is the most dangerous place I have ever been. Story 4. Steel mills as a contractor. I do not see how anyone lives long enough working there to retire. I get nervous having to wear flame-retardant coveralls and carry a carbon monoxide monitor. I have ridden in a crane bucket up 17 stories to get to a machine room. Story 5. Oahu, Hawaii. I moved there in 2003 when I was 18. I was beaten almost to death in broad daylight by a group of locals for no reason other than I was white, in the wrong neighborhood, and they wanted to rob me. No witnesses, nobody called an ambulance, nobody was ever caught or charged. Since I had no money and they didn't find the key to my truck, they stole my shoes and my skateboard. The next 2 years were rough. A lot of fights, a lot of fear, and a lot of dangerous people. I left the island and my dreams behind. I couldn't do it any longer. I had to leave. Story 6. Reynosa and Matamoros, Mexico. I personally know people and relatives who have been kidnapped, been in the wrong place at the wrong time when the narcotics traffickers start a shootout in the middle of the street, had vehicles stolen, or were killed for money or businesses. I have many stories about this place, but the food is good, so it is worth the trip whenever we visit family. Strangely, I felt less safe in New Orleans than in these two cities. New Orleans just made me feel like I needed to watch my shoulder at night all the time, especially after that man drove through Bourbon Street. Story 7. I accidentally became friends with a group of drug users. I went back to the man's place with his friends. It was a really dark crack den. They all started smoking Class A drugs. I eventually managed to leave before it became dangerous. Story 8. I was taking pictures of the outside of a Hells Angels chapter in New York City. Several members came out and informed me that no photos were allowed of their location. There was no violence, but I left immediately. Story 9. Driving Uber on the east side of Buffalo at 2 a.m. I remember thinking, oh, this isn't that bad. Then the next day on the local news, I saw there was a homicide on a street I had driven down less than 15 minutes earlier. I think I made $70 that night. Story 10. I've lived in South America, so I've been in some rough neighborhoods. Growing up, my mom had a Subaru Legacy with level 1 armoring in Peru. I still remember my grandmother shooting people, and one of our guards getting kidnapped and beaten up. I find it ridiculous when I travel with my American friends and they get afraid of certain neighborhoods in big cities. They act so tough, and suddenly in dangerous places in United States cities, they get scared. I have had several guns pointed at my head. I had to learn how to properly pit a car and perform evasive maneuvers. I was born in Europe, raised in South America, and now live in the United States. Honestly, in terms of toughness, Latin people are number 1, Americans are number 2, and Europeans are like number 7. Story 11. Northeast Washington, D.C. at night. It was incredibly dark. The cab driver said gangs had shot out most of the streetlights. There were groups of shadowy figures on nearly every corner. Our driver did not obey many traffic lights. Story 12. Greyhound bus station in Oakland, California, around midnight. I had $30,000 in cash on me and almost got stuck there for the night because the bus was full. Story 13. I traveled with Canadian soldiers through all 7 former Yugoslavian countries as that war was ending, including Sniper Alley in Sarajevo. I have my own photo of the famous picture where "Welcome to Hell" is scrawled on a concrete wall near the downtown market, where starving civilians were picked off by snipers as they scrambled for crumbs. It was surreal, frightening, and the most exciting trip of my life. I never came into any real danger but expected it to happen at any moment for 3 straight weeks. I came home with more gray hairs than I left with. Story 14. The parking lot of a Marriott hotel in Orlando. I was returning from my car to the hotel when a gunfight broke out between police officers and a group of drug dealers in the parking lot. I felt safer in the West Bank than I did there. Story 15. Afghanistan around 2002. Iraq around 2004. Inside several burning buildings. National forests while they are on fire. My bedroom when I tell my wife to calm down. Story 16. I want to say Helmand Province in Afghanistan, but I felt more in danger in some parts of Florida, Louisiana, and Texas, El Paso and Juarez in particular. Juarez was an intense night out though. Story 17. Panama, Ukraine, and downtown Portland, Oregon, specifically during the George Floyd protests in that order. I visited Panama with a friend who was born there. He told me to keep quiet whenever we went out because there were people who might harm me just for being white and rob me for being American. It was not a very pleasant experience. In Ukraine, I was there when the conflict with Russia began. I was on the border of Poland working at the civilian refugee camps. It was far from the bombs, but close enough to be unsettling. Portland is a strange place. It's not somewhere I plan to return to except to visit when the weather is good. The protests were intense, and I was attacked a couple of times for looking like a police officer, even though I have never worked in law enforcement. Story 18. Jane and Finch in Toronto way late at night many years ago. Some man came up to us and asked us to go around the back of a building because he wanted to show us something. We declined. Other than that, we were deep into Algonquin Park on a canoe trip that would have taken us a full day or more to reach our car. This was before satellite emergency devices were available. Story 19. Standing outside Camden Town K2 in 2001. At the end of a horrible September, my colleague and I, who owned a local bar and music venue, decided to get away for a couple of hours. He was a hip soul dancing guy with old school funky trainers. We always had a great time. He always went straight to the dance floor while I moved around like a pro. An hour into our local escape, he came and whispered to me, "The guy in the earthen man with the chopper t-shirt is going to shoot me. You leave by the front. I'll leave the back way." "No worries," I said. I had just lost my brother to cancer, so I didn't care, especially with the 11th and so many patrons and colleagues from around the world mourning in our bar. My head was a mess and I didn't care if I stayed or went, so I left by the front. If anyone is interested, I can finish the story. It was the most dangerous place I remember among many. I need to sort my dogs out. Story 20. I cannot say if it was statistically the most dangerous, but the last time I was in Miami, we passed a crime scene with a visible body on the shuttle bus from the airport. Story 21. Colombia during the war. I was in Cali one night needing to get back to where I was staying when the power went out, and we could hear gunfire as we waited for a taxi. Before it was common, we had to provide a secret word for the driver to confirm he was our ride. We had to avoid some streets but made it back safely and stayed inside until things quieted down and the power came back on. Story 22. My company sent me to Yemen for 2 weeks. I thought surely they would bring my body parts home in a trash bag. But somehow I made it. Story 23. South Korea was at a time very close to bombing North Korea in retaliation. Nothing wakes you up like a 5 a.m. phone call with the words, "Bring your real-world chemical bag." Afghanistan. Story 24. Bagram, Afghanistan. We had incoming 105mm mortar rounds on 48 separate occasions within 11 weeks. The closest was 75 meters away, but out on the pan on the other side of the blast walls from where I was lying down in the United Service Organizations. Story 25. Oakland, California, at 11 p.m. as a teenager in a perfectly restored 1979 Cadillac Seville. We were on our way to San Francisco and pulled off Interstate 80 to try and find a homeless person willing to buy us alcohol. There were 5 teenagers, myself included. We stopped at the first liquor store we found and waited, hoping a homeless person would come there. We didn't realize we were being watched by the locals. One man started staring and walking back and forth. After about 5 minutes, he left. A couple of minutes later, a homeless-looking man came into the parking lot. I got out, walked up to him, and asked if he would go in and buy a bottle of vodka for us. I told him I would give him $20 for his trouble. He agreed but said he also wanted a drink from it. Deal. He brought the alcohol to us. I offered him a small cup to drink from, but he opened the bottle and drank about a third of it in one gulp. He handed it over and said, "You kids better get back on the road before someone kills you just for that car." We pulled out of the parking lot just as the man who had been watching us arrived as a passenger in a car with at least 2 or 3 other men. He was pointing at us as we left. We hurried back toward the freeway, and they caught up to us just as we were getting back on Interstate 80. They followed us at a distance. We got lucky when a highway patrol officer was parked on the shoulder 2 exits ahead. We pulled over in front of him and they kept going. The officer turned on his lights, got out, and came to see what the problem was. We told him we were going to San Francisco to stay the night with a friend and do some tourist activities the following day, and that we thought we might be lost. This was the early 1990s, so no GPS in your pocket, and it didn't seem suspicious to him. He gave us directions we didn't need, and we were back on the road in 10 minutes. Dumb kids, not realizing their surroundings, just trying to get alcohol and almost getting robbed. Story 26. Afghanistan, Iraq, 70% of Africa, and Fayetteville, North Carolina, also known as Vietnam. The last was somewhat jokingly said, but my wife was robbed at a bank twice, and our car was part of a murder scene at the mall. A friend was held at gunpoint at an intersection while his truck was stolen. Then, for days later, after having to drive his motorcycle to work, it was stolen from his driveway at 6 in the evening. My last tour was less eventful than my time at Fort Bragg. Story 27. 1985 Martin Luther King, Jr. weekend. Flying with a friend in his twin-engine Beach Baron into a serious blizzard at night in the Smoky Mountains heading to Knoxville. Ice building on the wings. Total instrument flight rules the whole trip from Memphis. We made it safely. That got my blood stirred up a bit. Story 28. Free climbing up the face of Huntington's Ravine with no experience, possibly. Also some risky behavior on various motorcycles. Story 29. The bowels of a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier weapons magazine, full of weapons. That is a shady part of Tijuana I almost did not come home from. No, I do not want to talk about it. Story 30. I'm not sure. The place that felt the most dangerous was Abu Ghraib on a random spring day about 20 years ago. This feeling, however, is offset by the fact that I was not particularly close to the extremely dangerous fighting, at least not in the useful relative sense. Objectively, this was a very dangerous day for quite a few people, but me? I was installing a server and thus had the benefit of many walls and was behind several very heavily armed United States Marines. By contrast, hiking Angel's Landing, one of the major hikes in Utah's Zion National Park, didn't feel nearly as dangerous despite having to complete it with trail spikes due to many patches of ice along the way. That is a hike that regularly kills people. So despite not feeling nearly as dangerous, the odds of something very bad happening to me there may well have been higher than the closest I ever came to combat across 2 deployments with the United States Army. Story 31. Somewhere off 100th Street and International Boulevard in Oakland with a friend trying to buy a large amount of drugs. We found ourselves in a warehouse filled with many people hallucinating and yelling. Story 32. I used to go into abandoned houses and look around at all the old stuff left behind a lot. One particular house my friend and I went into had partially collapsed. The entire kitchen was basically a pile of rubble and the roof had caved in. I went down into the basement to look around and saw a crawl space that I could climb into about 4 feet off the floor of the basement and going under other parts of the house, including the kitchen. Parts of the crawl space were also caved in where the kitchen used to be. There was all kinds of stuff in there, so I crawled in and had to squeeze through the caved-in areas to get through. Nothing happened, luckily, but I thought about it after the fact and realized how dangerous it was. I could have gotten trapped or crushed, and there would have been pretty much nothing my friend could have done to help me. All in all, it was probably pretty tame as far as dangerous places go, but I am not much of a danger seeker, so that is probably the most dangerous place that comes to mind for me. Story 33. Mombasa, Kenya. My group took a bus as it was much cheaper than a taxi. The taxi drivers did not like this because they considered themselves to have exclusive rights over tourists. It turned into a street fight with machetes drawn. We ran away as quickly as we could. Story 34. Walking through a rural baseball field in the middle of the night at the age of 15 or 16. No lights, no moonlight, no noise at all, not even crickets. Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Hills Have Eyes were the only things going through my head. Story 35. We were driving outside of Detroit thrifting. We went down a back street. There was a gang member, or at least someone who looked like one, on the porch of an abandoned-looking house. I was scared, but I am pretty scared of everything. Story 36. I was in Cairo during the Muslim Brotherhood uprising. So my answer is Mfatha and Lusikisiki, South Africa. Story 37. Not sure if it is the most dangerous or the safest, to be honest, but notable drug dealer spots would be at the top of one of those categories. I am just not sure which one. On the one hand, if I do not do something stupid, it is fairly safe. But if I do one small thing, I can get on a bad list very fast. Story 38. Driving on a highway. Look at the numbers. Many people die because of highway driving. I know at least 12 people personally who have died because of car accidents. Then add the number of those injured, and it rises even higher. Story 39. Guess it depends on what you mean by dangerous. I drove from North Carolina to Alaska over the course of a week last year. I am not sure. I went through Chicago and Anchorage. I saw some moose and bison in the Yukon. Story 40. Northwest Philadelphia. Heroin needles were on the yard and sidewalk everywhere. There was almost no police presence because of the nature of the neighborhood, which even scared law enforcement. I still remember being woken up at 2 a.m. by a brick breaking a window. The police did arrive, but nothing was really done. It turned out to be a deal gone wrong, and the person, who was intoxicated, mistakenly targeted the wrong house. Story 41. I storm chase, so probably when I am core punching to get to the tornado, or just getting too close to them regardless. Story 42. Half-dome cables, coming down, stuck behind my friend's daughter having a panic attack. Nothing like staring down at your easy demise while not moving for 20 to 30 minutes. Story 43. Morocco in 1998. We were warned that the local police would not hesitate to arrest anyone suspected of being under the influence of narcotics. I was wandering around town with the worst stomach illness I have ever had. I ended up passing out in a rug shop and woke to our group leader trying to calm a furious shopkeeper. Story 44. 12th and Jackson in Seattle during the evening. I had to run to identification to catch the light rail north before it got sketchy. Story 45. Richmond, Virginia, in the early 2000s was the only time in my life I had someone pull a knife on me in an attempt to rob me. Story 46. Hanging out late in Washington, District of Columbia, at some stranger's house, walking around Baltimore, Maryland around 1 to 2 a.m., spending summers in Duquesne, Pennsylvania was interesting. I never had any problems yet, but I would not cross anyone there. Story 47. I was skiing off-piste in the French Alps and narrowly avoided getting caught in and probably killed by an avalanche. Story 48. Different places I have lived. In one, there was a civil war. Behind us was a university associated with communists. One day, the army entered, bullets hitting the house in front of us, helicopters flying overhead. In the same place, one day there was a coup attempt. P-51 Mustangs strafed an army garrison a couple of blocks away. I was watching from the roof. In another country, I lived in a second-floor apartment. One night, a car was driving the wrong way, followed by police. Crashed in a ditch because of road work on the whole street. Bullets started flying. My brother shouted, "Come look!" I was sleeping soundly. In the same place, there was a protest because of election fraud. Outside, riot police threw tear gas. I was sleeping deeply. Yes, Latin America in the 1970s and 1980s was eventful. Story 49. I've never really been anywhere I felt unsafe, maybe sleeping in my car during a trip to Miami, but not even then. Story 50. Baltimore, Maryland, 2003, after 3 a.m. I am from the Bay Area, so I am familiar with tough areas. We got lost trying to find the freeway entrance and turned onto a street to go around the block in the opposite direction. About 20 men stood up and watched us drive by. Nothing happened, but we definitely felt we were not supposed to be there. Story 51. I went with a pastor friend on a preliminary trip to a church in Jamaica. We were seeing if we could set up a larger trip for some church members to fly down and help out in various ways. The church we stayed at for the week was in the middle of the poorest neighborhood I have ever seen. The whole area was built from whatever the occupants could scrounge up. There was unsafe electrical wiring, gravity plumbing made of garden hoses fed from tanks on the roof that had to be filled with a community hose. The worst part was that there always seemed to be a group of suspicious people watching us from a little distance. It turned out the pastor had the whole community convinced he could put a nasty hex on them if they messed with his guests. Otherwise, we would have been mugged right away. In the end, no follow-up trip was ever arranged. Story 52. About 20 years ago, I was on vacation in Central Europe. I went out for a 20-kilometer run in rural Romania. I am not sure if I was in danger, but any local could have done something, and I might have disappeared. I have also lived through 4 or 5 Category 4 or 5 hurricanes, just waiting for them to pass. Story 53. I moved into a place years ago. The first night I was there, I was in that stage of moving and unpacking where I had nothing, so I went to order a pizza. Everything went fine until the person on the phone heard my address and told me they did not deliver to my location. I asked which place did deliver. He told me I was in their territory, but they would not deliver to me. I could meet them on the street at the end of the cul-de-sac, but they would not come down my street. I definitely should have done more research before I moved in. Story 54. Streets of Buffalo, New York, circa the late 1990s to early 2000s, with gunshots nearly every night. Funny story, houses back then cost $40,000. Today, you can't buy a house for less than $120,000, and across the street there is a house for sale for $1 million. A wild place to live. Story 55. I live in Arizona. It is 117 degrees Fahrenheit with 8% humidity right now. It is kind of dangerous. I have jumped out of a few airplanes. I have also bungee jumped off a bridge with a train going above me over a dry riverbed and off a tethered hot air balloon. Fun activities that some may consider dangerous. Story 56. Siskiyou Pass during a blizzard whiteout. Lanes undiscernible, semi-trucks whizzing past. Vehicles ahead spinning out. Not in stomach for days. Story 57. As a teenager in the 1970s, 3 friends and I went spelunking in a long-closed cave. We explored parts of the cave that were never open to the public and smoked marijuana. Story 58. On a ridge in the Peruvian Andes Mountains in a lockup with my wife, we were interrogated by teenage Shining Path rebels. It is easy to think that they could have had us stand at the edge, put a bullet in our heads, and we would have fallen to oblivion, never to be seen again. Story 59. A high-voltage distribution center. I was informed that if I extended my arm upwards to point something out, I would likely get electrocuted by 230,000 volts. Story 60. I grew up in New Orleans. By the time I was 21, I had been mugged twice, both off campus during free period in high school, jumped for turning down a hustler, stabbed in my leg for attempting to prevent my brother's bike from being stolen, and witnessed a murder. I moved out of that city when I was 22. Story 61. Red Hook Projects, Brooklyn, New York. 3 a.m. New York City Emergency Medical Services. Emergency Medical Specialist 2. Wore a bullet-resistant vest each night for 3.5 years. Story 62. Some steep dirt road trying to get to Yosemite. Driving my wife's Ford Focus, the global positioning system told us to make a left. Started off as a paved road. Then it became a gravel road. Then a dirt road. It was our first time going to Yosemite, so we didn't realize how wrong these directions actually were. To make it worse, a former coworker used to tell me, "Driving to Yosemite is incredible. You might think there's nothing to see, but then it opens up into the most beautiful place on earth." Back to the road. It was on a slight incline. Then it got steeper. After about 15 to 20 minutes, we lost the global positioning system signal. The road had narrowed and we could clearly see deep muddy tracks in front of us. We stopped. We looked to our right and realized that we were not only really high up, but we were close to the edge and it was a steep drop down. Our mood instantly changed from, "This doesn't seem right," to "We're going to die." No global positioning system. No phone signal. No people. Only us. On a one-lane steep dirt road that we quickly realized was actually a dirt path on the edge of a mountain. Oh yeah, reminder. We're in a four-door Ford Focus. It's a two-wheel drive vehicle in an area much better suited for off-road vehicles. All we needed to do was make a U-turn and drive back to safety. Only one problem. There was no room for a U-turn. I put the Focus in reverse and spent the next 30 to 40 minutes trying to get back down the mountain without driving over the edge on one side or into a muddy pit on the other. A fall off the edge would have led to a scary but quick death. Getting stuck in a muddy pit would have been better, unless we couldn't get out and died from exposure. Spoiler alert, we made it out alive, but I'll bet you already figured that because you are not an idiot. Story 63. Pulling my friend who could not swim out of a river during the start of a rainstorm, trying to avoid twisted branches underneath the water as we reached the bank. On top of that, we had to tread through a lot of poison ivy to get back to where our car was parked. The most frightening experience I have ever had. They mocked me when I said we should wear life vests while we went canoeing. Now they owe me. Story 64. Oakland, California, at 11 p.m., as a teenager in a perfectly restored 1979 Cadillac Seville. We were on our way to San Francisco and pulled off Interstate 80 to try and find a homeless person willing to buy us alcohol. 5 teenagers, myself included. We stopped at the first liquor store we found and waited, hoping someone would come there. We didn't realize we were being sized up by the locals. One man started staring and pacing back and forth. After about 5 minutes, he left. A couple of minutes later, a homeless-looking man came into the parking lot. I got out, walked up to him, and asked if he would go in and buy a handle of vodka for us. I told him I'd give him $20 for his trouble. He said yes, but he also wanted a drink. Deal. He brought the alcohol out to us. I offered a little cup for him to have some. He declined. Instead, he opened the bottle and chugged probably a third of it in one drink. He handed it over and said, "You kids better get back down the road before someone kills you just for that car." We left the parking lot just as the man who had been sizing us up earlier pulled in as a passenger in a car with at least 2 or 3 other men. He was pointing at us as we were leaving. We hurried back toward the freeway and they caught up to us just as we were getting back on Interstate 80. They followed us at a distance. We got lucky when a highway patrol car was parked on the shoulder 2 exits ahead. We pulled over in front of the officer, and the other car kept going. The highway patrol officer turned on his lights, got out, and came to see what our problem was. We told him we were going to San Francisco to stay the night with a friend and do some tourist activities the following day. We thought we might be lost. This was the early 1990s, so no GPS in your pocket. It wasn't suspicious to him. He gave us directions we didn't really need, and we were back on the road in 10 minutes. Dumb kids don't realize their surroundings, just trying to get alcohol and almost, at the very least, get robbed. Story 65. I have a couple of stories. When I was around 8 to 10 years old, my uncle took me camping with his friends. He told my parents it was just Bureau of Land Management land to ride all-terrain vehicles and roast marshmallows. In reality, it was a semi-hidden spot in a back corner of an oil field where they did ride all-terrain vehicles, but they also brought an old washing machine too. Chute full of holes. The campsite had abandoned wells scattered about that could be dangerous or deadly if you misstepped. They smelled terrible. I later learned that was hydrogen sulfide. The only way to watch out for the wells was that since they were filled with water, there would be a ring of grass and weeds growing around them in the otherwise desert area. Hey kid, see that hole? Don't fall in. Okay? The morning after we arrived, I got up and went wandering. I found some neat things, including a broken arrowhead. I wasn't watching ahead and nearly tumbled down a 10-foot deep ravine. I decided it was time to head back and then heard popping sounds coming from the camp area and a buzzing noise right overhead. I still don't know why I wasn't scared. I just found a little hill about 3 feet tall and laid down behind it until the guys got tired and hungry and stopped shooting. I was never hurt and spent the rest of the weekend closer to camp and well away from downrange. I've driven through Oakland and Richmond, California, through some of the sketchiest parts of town, and I was absolutely threatened several times on both days. One time, I was participating in a gimmick rally, a street race where you only get the route by solving clues on a sheet of paper. In an innocent stretch of urban San Jose, the whole group got lost due to a bad clue, and as each one of us passed one house, we got a personal salute from a hooligan wannabe waving a pistol. Not as scary, but one day I went surf fishing in the wrong spot on the wrong day. Surf fishing is where you have a long fishing pole and work right at the water's edge, moving in and out of the way of the waves. Along the Pacific Ocean, things can and do get rowdy, and the water is cold. The waves were averaging 5 to 6 feet high and coming in fast and frequent. I got to a spot where the beach bent inward with rocks and a cliff, enhancing the funnel shape. Two waves combined and made one great big one that swooshed up well past me, as high as my navel, picked up a section of driftwood as wide as a telephone pole, and started banging me about the legs with it. I don't know how I stayed upright. I had nothing to hold on to. Had the wave taken me back, it would have sucked me out, as I knew there was a rip current in the area, and my backpack would have kept me down in the water. I don't fish that beach anymore. Story 66. Inside Michigan City Maximum Security Prison to visit my dad's best friend. This was in the early 1970s. I heard 4 doors close and lock behind me as I walked down a long hallway to the next locked doors until I knew I was deep inside with no easy way out. I don't know if it was true, but he leaned over to me in a long line of chairs and said the guy behind me skinned people. I jumped to his lap and never forgot the sound and feel of those doors. Kept me on the straight and narrow. Story 67. Boston Commons, New Year's Eve. Miami during Hurricane Andrew. 3 miles from Burt's in Matlacha during Hurricane Ian. Detroit in the 1980s. Story 68. Maybe Thor's well. I got cool photos and was sensible and cautious, but it did feel like the sneaker waves could have swept me away if things were a little different. On the other hand, it may be comparable to my typical Dallas commute. Story 69. I have been to Omaha Beach in Normandy, France. At one point in time, approximately 100,000 people died in Normandy during World War II. Story 70. Stuck in traffic, drinking my morning coffee with a hangover from drinking alcohol all night. Getting to a bathroom in time was very difficult. Story 71. Stuck in traffic drinking my morning coffee with a hangover from drinking beer all night. Getting to a bathroom in time was a very dangerous game. Story 72. Riding a bus on the terrifying Yungas Road in Bolivia in the 1980s, known as the Death Road due to accidents. It was a narrow road with steep slopes and no guardrails. The bus driver would honk when going around tight blind curves. Now, it is only used by thrill-seeking cyclists. Story 73. Rip current. It is very scary. You go to dive a wave, and when you come up, you are just 30 feet farther than where you were before. Then, another wave crashes into you, pushing you another 30 feet out. You realize you have to swim parallel to the shore immediately. Feels like Michael Phelps in an Olympic race. Cannot touch the bottom, can only swim and watch for waves. It is terrifying. I remember waving and screaming for help, but people thought I was just playing around. Another wave crashes into me. I come up coughing, choking, gasping, and am very far from where I started. Then, another wave hits. I was almost a football field away from shore. It was absolutely terrifying. I spent about 10 minutes dealing with it and eventually crawled back onto the beach. Story 74. In terms of crime, Orange Mound and Fraser in Memphis are notable. Regarding imminent threats to my safety, it is probably near power lines immediately after storms have taken them down, or when someone crashed into and snapped a power pole, leaving it live and in 2 pieces until the power company could de-energize it. Story 75. Rio. I used to be an international recruiter and I go there for a couple of weeks every year. I would stay at the Sofitel Hotel right on the corner of Ipanema Beach and Copacabana Beach. It is basically safe during the day, but at night the place changes. Sex workers, drug dealers, and thugs are everywhere. Story 76. From general crime in Quito, Ecuador. From being in specifically the wrong place in Baltimore, that one gas station I will never go back to. From weather, partway up Mount Washington, New Hampshire, with a minus 89 degrees Fahrenheit wind chill. From other health-related dangers, the Vermont Asbestos Group site in Vermont, the largest pile of exposed asbestos in the United States. Story 77. I have traveled to over 20 countries and many cities, including remote areas. The most dangerous experience was a layover in a rough part of Los Angeles at 1 a.m., walking on foot while looking for a liquor store. Story 78. Probably 40 feet underwater, which is not particularly dangerous as long as you do not hold your breath during ascent and pay attention to your gauges. Story 79. Probably going to the projects in Southwest Atlanta to buy marijuana when I was 17. I did it a few times, always foolish. Before that day, I had always waited in the car. The last time, the man had me meet him behind the property where a brick of marijuana sat on the concrete. No bag, just marijuana. He demanded that I pick it up and walk away. Before I left, I noticed a burn spot in the parking lot with police tape. When I asked about it, the man I rode with said someone had been burned alive in a car. It might have been false, but I never went back. Story 80. Behind the wheel of a city transit bus. It is a toss-up between the drivers and the passengers as to which role is more dangerous. Story 81. In a Humvee hit by an improvised explosive device, I did not lose any body parts or anyone else. I am still in therapy for that. When I got back to the United States, I could not stop shaking for months. Story 82. Accidentally walked onto an active military firing range in Armenia. The map program indicated trails, but those were actually tank tracks. Story 83. In the mid-1990s, I had to exit the 110 freeway in Los Angeles due to construction or an accident. I got turned around and was briefly lost in South Central at 1 a.m. with a long blonde ponytail and an Asian girlfriend. Story 84. Inside a machine without proper safety stops. Drunk wandering the back streets of Tijuana. Stuck in mud on a riverbank. Not all at once. Story 85. Mall in Oakland, California. It was like being stuck in a dangerous neighborhood. Second place was a mosh pit at a Metallica concert with all the opening bands. Story 86. Azerbaijan, exactly 1 month after the embassy of my country advised against traveling there due to poor diplomatic relations that could lead to arrest even if you did nothing, I went anyway. Story 87. Spinning in a car during a tornado. I was not even scared because I had no idea what was happening, and it was over so fast. The real danger was the intersections with no traffic lights and people flying through. Ottawa, 1993. Story 88. Iraq, Baghdad Airport. I was returning from a business trip and planned to get off at the VIP airport, but the driver did not understand me. I found myself standing outside the very crowded Baghdad airport, where everyone was pushing to get inside. Once inside, I realized I was the only unaccompanied female traveler. I sat by myself in a coffee shop and received looks from every passing man. I was flying business class but could not find the lounge. When boarding started and I boarded the plane, I felt a sense of safety and relief. Story 89. I was a tourist on this back road in Guatemala that the guidebook mentioned was frequented by armed guerrillas. Story 90. Floating oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico, 180 miles south of New Orleans. The water was a mile deep. It operated oil, water, and gas separators and processed 5 million gallons per day. There was always the potential for disaster. It was generally safe, but in an emergency, help was an hour away, or 2 hours if a round trip was required. Story 91. Underwater at the base of a large lowhead dam, also known as the drowning machine. It started swallowing water and then pushed it out for some reason. Do not walk across mossy lowhead dams, children, especially after a few drinks. Story 92. Drunk and asleep on a couch in the office at a friend's party in high school, while most people were in the basement or kitchen, except for the wrestler who found me. I made it out before it got bad, just because someone opened the door. Story 93. The Magumbo Bar was a rough place, the seediest dive on the wharf. It was populated with every cutthroat from Mumbai to Kolkata, worse than Detroit. Story 94. Mogadishu, Somalia, and Kabul and Kandahar, Afghanistan with the military. I also lived in India for 2 years and drove a motorcycle there. There were no road safety laws and safety was not a priority. Story 95. I was a correctional officer at Joliet Correctional Center for a couple of years, so I guess I will go with that. It was between that and Detroit. Haha. Story 96. On the back of a speed bike, the driver was going 210 kilometers per hour on a winding country road. I nearly fainted when I saw the number on the dashboard but stayed awake because it was that or die. We do not speak anymore. Story 97. Camping in a gigantic thunderstorm. My girlfriend at the time and I went camping, and being the hippies we dropped some acid as the sun went down. We spent a couple of hours tripping out in the tent when suddenly we started to see flashes of light. At first, we figured it was just someone else with a flashlight, until we heard a distant ominous boom. I looked out the tent. To my left was a perfect starry night, and to my right was a giant black doom cloud with a huge amount of lightning coming from it. We began scrambling to get everything out of the tent and back into the car. We managed, but we left the tent because there was no way we were figuring that out, and took shelter in the car just as the rain hit us. The storm was the most intense I have ever seen. It lasted all night and had about a strike per second, many of them landing close. A nearby radio tower was hit again and again. At one point, I suddenly felt tingly all over and looked at my girlfriend, and we saw that our hair was standing on end. We had maybe a half-second moment of realization of what that meant before a huge explosion. It was like a flashbang went off right beside me. Hit right outside the passenger window, so close that had the window been down, I could have reached out and grabbed it. It left a huge streak of glowing ionized air for a second or so where the bolt had been, which told me it was likely a positive lightning strike. At the time, I described it as if Zeus and his Greek god brothers were chilling when they saw a couple of puny humans tripping in a giant lightning storm and said, "Hey guys, want to see something really funny?" and tossed a bolt at us. Thus, You Puny Humans was born. Story 98. The inside of a grain bin. I have done many dangerous things in my 19 years of life. Growing up, my brother and I would play in the corn bin and jump off the ladder from higher up. Story 99. Sadr City, Mahmoudiya, and Yusufia, Iraq, 2005 to 2007. 101st Airborne Infantry Division. Triangle of Death. Story 100. The Golan Heights in Israel was not part of the original plan, but our bus driver decided to give us a treat. Story 101. I lived on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive in Atlanta. I was the only white person living there as far as I knew. The income-based apartment complex was called Martin Manor. It was directly in front of the train tracks that separated two rival drug gang territories. The homicide police had my front door blocked by yellow tape about once a week, investigating fresh murders. Sometimes there was more than one dead body in my front yard when I came home from work. It happened so often that I stopped even having to ask the police if I could go under the barricade tape to get to my front door. They knew me and just let me go under. My AT&T digital subscriber line service was shot out multiple times during spray and pray shootouts. The apartment phone box had been shot so many times they stopped replacing it and just taped over the holes when they came to repair phone service. People were afraid to take the bus from Hamilton Station to the apartment bus stop because so many people were shot getting off the bus during gang hits. We all just walked from the train station to the apartments. It was a lot safer to walk the 2 miles. I was suicidal at the time and kind of enjoyed being in the situation. I figured it would only be a matter of time before my number came up, but it never did. Even more surprising was that all of the black people were very nice to me. My roommate was an older black man who hated white people but loved me deeply. We became friends at the Grady Behavioral Health Clinic. When he found out I had the same diagnosis he did, he wanted to get to know me, and we became good friends. He told me that nobody would mess with me because I looked crazy and I didn't belong there. He said black people are very afraid of crazy white people because they can't figure us out. I thought it was hilarious, but over time I started to think he might be onto something. Story 102. In between 2 tornadoes on Interstate 30 in New Boston, Texas, when you see no semi-trucks on the freeway, that is an indicator to get off the road. The sirens were eerie, as was the green sky. Story 103. In the bathroom of a Kentucky Fried Chicken on the side of a highway in the middle of a tornado, there was a large glassed-in area full of people when we arrived. We went straight to the bathroom because of the cinderblock walls. We stayed there for a couple of minutes, but felt like an hour as the whole building shook around us. After it subsided, we came out to find the glassed-in area completely shattered and all the tables had been sucked out of the dining room. I have no idea where the people went, but I hope they had the good sense to find cover. Bonus round. I lived in a neighborhood in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the early 2000s that was colloquially called Little Vietnam, not because of the Vietnamese population. I heard gunshots every night, not just one or two, but barrages, sometimes volleys. I saw a child on a skateboard get run over by a car one day. The ambulance and police car stayed about 150 feet away from the bleeding child for 10 minutes until a higher-up from the local gang arrived to supervise. That neighborhood was not taking any chances. Story 104. Galatasaray to watch Manchester United around 1995. Bands and gangs of Turks with machetes and meat cleavers. The police did very little. Many fans got hurt that night. Story 105. In Falls City, Nebraska, in one night, I had to de-escalate a random fight at a party and had two guns pointed at me at a different party earlier. Story 106. Bien Hoa, Vietnam during the Tet Offensive. I lived on the small, isolated Honor Smith compound with the officers of the 118 Aviation Company. Scary 3 days. Story 107. 3 places. At home when a child, in Oakland when buying a vehicle that was a scam, did not buy it, and pulling a girl out of the street where her car was burning and people were driving by, about to run her over. Forgot that one at first. Story 108. I'm a 75-year-old male. The deck of a patrol boat river in Vietnam in 1969. It was a fairly dangerous place. I was sent on a 12-month tour but did not make it that long. About 8 months into it, I failed to duck in time. It cost me 2 months in a hospital plus another month of rehabilitation and therapy. Story 109. Installing satellites in North St. Louis by myself. They stole my van and all my belongings, but they at least waited until I got their cable working. Story 110. In the 1990s, my 25-year-old self and my friend had just caught a bus back from Disneyland after the park had closed, complete with mouse ears and Disney bags, walking around downtown Los Angeles. I turned to my friend and said, "Hey, isn't that the lake from the television show Cops?" Spoiler, it was. A genuine Good Samaritan took pity on us and directed us to a bus stop that would get us back to our friend's place. At 5th and Broadway, on one side of the street, a man was injecting drugs. Diagonally across was Elon Sleazebagango counting his very thick stack of bills. And lastly, right next to us was my buddy. He was 8 feet tall, wearing a down parka, ski gloves, a balaclava, and wraparound shades. In May, they all left us alone, probably realizing we were just too stupid to waste time on, and they were very, very right. Story 111. Wakeboarding, and my hand got stuck in the rope when I fell. The boat dragged me under the water for a while. Story 112. In the sea where I nearly got swept onto the rocks, my brother rescued me but was swept onto the rocks himself. No bones were broken or teeth knocked out, but his body was cut open with shallow cuts. Story 113. Boulder, Colorado. I was stuck on the side of the mountain because I misstepped onto a ledge with no way back. A climber came by, reached out his hand, and pulled me back over. Story 114. Inside a locked forensic unit, all male, with only 2 guards and 24 residents at a state hospital. 10 locked heavy metal doors separated me from the location I was to be in. I was in a basement with 4 men with no way past them. I was a small child. I will say that the orientation we went through before entering the forensic unit caused me to have a complete meltdown panic at one point, and I was given the option to do something else. However, I ended up doing very well with that assignment. It lasted a few months. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.